Season 1 Diablo 4 Barbarian tier list, the best builds to play, what's the most fun for speed farming, pushing, all of that good stuff. We're going to dive into it next. What up team, it is MurderInc and we're talking about, as we said, the Barbarian tier list. What are the best builds going to be to play for fun, not for fun, strictly for pushing? That's what we're here to discuss. Now you might be thinking, wait a minute, how could you possibly know what the best builds are going to be for Season 1 if there's a whole season of the Malignant theme coming out with new gems, all of this good stuff? This is why. We don't know how early we're going to get the gems. Most likely, and this is just speculation of course, most likely we're not going to get it at the start of the game. So what does that mean? We're going to have to pick a build. Of course we're going to level. This has nothing to do with leveling. Let's just be 100% clear right now. Nothing to do with leveling. So unless they make it so we get our full Malignant gems, doubt it. But if we do, while leveling, this tier list will make no sense. But these current builds are going to be placed in such a way that you can pick if you want to speed farm fast, push fast, do whatever you have to do, and then if a gem makes the build even stronger, because it's unlikely, if a gem makes your build weaker, just don't use the gem, right? Right. So, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about the overall game. One tier list isn't going to do anybody justice here. If you're looking for an overall tier list, we're going to start with that. Then we'll modify it and break it down a little bit later. So don't just take screenshots of this and say, oh, this is going to be good, that's going to be good. You need context behind what we're talking about here today. So as far as best overall builds, what does that mean? Good for speed farming, good for pushing into high tiers of Nightmare, and we will also include bossing on that list as well. So for that, to nobody's, or maybe to some people's surprise, the number one is going to be Double Swing. It can push the highest the most consistently. Elites aren't a problem. It does struggle a little bit as far as how fast it can go, but that's it. If you want to kill Lilith with this, you can. It's been done. I didn't think it has, but because everyone's abusing Hammer the Ancients, the Quake bug that may or may not get fixed, so we'll talk about that when we get to the skill. So for the overall best build, we have Double Swing. I do have a guide on that. It's really fun. It's not like a brainless game style, so let's make that clear right now. It's not going to be brainless, but overall it's going to be the best. The next thing we're going to do is the Mace Whirlwind build. Best overall. It's going to be the fastest clearing speed farm build ever. Only tied with the one hand. You can use Malignant. That's what really puts this in the top S tier for best Barbarian builds here. But that's why this gets the slot. The only place both Whirlwind builds aren't the best are bosses. For bosses, especially Lilith, don't think you're going to be facing Lilith. You'll have to change your build for this, but it's so strong in the other areas as far as pushing goes and just speed clearing Nightmare dungeons for glyph XP, normal experience, which who doesn't want that? That's probably the most important thing in the game. And it could have overtaken Double Swing, but I just couldn't personally do that for this list. And of course, this is going to be a personal preference tier list. So let's get that straight now. The next thing we're going to talk about is the baseline Hammer the Ancients. Now this is rather slow for farming. I do have the machine gun build that I talked about that does not take Unbridled Rage. It makes it really, really fast for speed farming. As soon as you take an Unbridled Rage, the build gets crazy slow, but it's really good for bossing and it's decent for pushing as well. I would say it's a little bit worse than Whirlwind, and Whirlwind is going to be, of course, worse for pushing than Double Swing, so it still makes the top tier of the overall list. This is where we start getting into the A tier. Moving on to the A tier, we have Thorns. It can push well. It's a bit slow. It's probably the second best pushing build we have, but like I said, it is a bit slow. It's safe for sure, so if you're hardcore, you may want to consider Thorns if that's your cup of tea. I know I have the iron skin thing there, but I put a T there, so we know it means Thorns. After that, of course, we're going to have the Machine Gun Hota build. So it's going to be just as good as Hammer the Ancients. The only difference is bossing, it's going to struggle a little bit more because we can't quite take advantage of the 50 or 40 million crits with the Quake. But if this is nerfed, then both of these builds are just going to slide down. It may be the fact that the Machine Gun stays here, but if the Quake gets nerfed, normal Hammer the Ancients may even go down to B tier. So keep this in mind just in case we see this from the upcoming patch notes. And then following up next in the A tier is going to be the Axe variant of the Whirlwind build. Yes, there's lots of Whirlwind icons here because there are so many different builds for it and they all perform very strong. The Axe variant can farm very quickly. It has the same struggles on bosses and it's worse DPS than the No Bleed Mace build above and the one-handed build as well. And then finally in this tier I have the Iron Maelstrom icon. What is this referring to? This is referring to my personal favorite build, the one I'm going to play for sure here. It's the most expensive, as I titled it in the video, Whirlwind build, or probably build in the game, where it just requires you to have really high IP and of course proper stats on all 4 of your weapons. But this is one of those missing links for the boss killing aspects. Why is it not an S tier? Because of that, because as a result the build is overall squishier, it's not as tanky. So for pushing, you're not going to be pushing, but it is arguably the fastest speed farming variant of all of the Whirlwind builds, because it has this on use button with Iron Maelstrom that just deletes ranged packs and elite packs instantly when you use this button. It has a screen-wide AoE for those annoying mobs that are constantly backpedaling from you, and I love it. Like I said, I'm going to be playing it forever, so it is what it is. Well, forever. We'll see what the Malignant gems do, of course, to enhance this build. Maybe it'll be good. Who knows? So now we're going into the bottom tier here. Now, this is the thing with Rend. We did a video on Rend, how it's quote-unquote bugged, busted on stagnant dummies that just scale the damage up to the moon, but in real content it has some major flaws. This is why I'm not too sure what to do with Rend, because if Blizzard starts seeing the meme videos of the undecillion, whatever the post was that I saw on Wowhead where this was showcased again against a stationary mob, if they just look at that and nerf it to the ground, Bleed doesn't even make the tier list. It's not going to be viable at all. If they keep it as is, it's like hovering in between A and B tier. I want to put it in A tier. The farming, I mean, it can one-shot any pack in the game with how it's working. It's really hard to execute, and because it's so hard to execute, that's why I'm putting in the B tier for sure. Bosses, it does negative boss damage. That's just how flawed bleeds are in general. So again, B almost seems an overstep for this unless someone can figure out a way to incorporate bossing into a build like this that can just delete packs with perfect play, of course. But for now, we're going to put this into B tier here. Rend, of course, also pairs together with Rupture if there are any Rend Rupture builds that are to your liking for sure. And now that we've gone over that, we're going to go 1 tier down because Rend is going to be in that tier alone. And this is where we have the Bleed variant and the Sword variant of Whirlwind. Now, what makes this so much worse? As we already stated, bleeds in this game just don't scale very well. With that being said, if you're using the Bleed variation of Whirlwind build, you're putting all of your chips in one basket, right? If you don't kill it with the Bleed, you have these mobs running around with like 10 health following you, and it's just a mess. I played it at the start. That's what led me to make the No Bleed Mace build, and I don't know. From there, everything's been history, where that slowly became the meta for Whirlwind along with the one hand. So the Bleed build is just so far behind. Technically, it can do better on bosses, technically, because bleeds do tend to scale better with the Whirlwind build specifically for bossing than just the front-loaded damage, because bosses move a lot, but if they're moving with decent-sized bleeds on them, of course your uptime is going to be higher. And then, of course, the Sword build. Why is the Sword build here? It's the 4th to last worst, I guess, Whirlwind variant, if you consider a no bleed version. So just to clarify that, the Mace, Axe, one hand, and the sword are no bleed variants. The B is for bleeding only. Why is sword the worst? It doesn't scale as well. Yes, you're getting crit damage, but if you just swap to axe, which is healthy hit, you get better farming, you have a ton of damage to healthy, but you also get the cleaver glyph. What does the cleaver glyph do? It gives you multiplicative crit damage. It lets you get an additional 10% crit rate. A lot of people overlook this, but 10% crit rate as opposed to the sword expertise, which does nothing for a no bleed build, right? That's pretty much made for the bleed build, so that's why sword is on the bottom for the Whirlwind tier. Now we're going to go to the D tier, which is where Death Blow, Upheaval, Leap, Kick, any other variant in skill for Barbarian is going to be in the D tier. Now I need to make this clear. Waiting until this point, so if you made it here or you clicked off too early, you're farmed. I did this on purpose. D tier may be on the bottom of this list and may mean it's technically the worst of all of them for an overall build, but you can still clear everything you need to clear in the D tier. Are you going to be doing Uber Lilith at level 100 with these builds? As of right now, probably not. You can hit the enrage timers, there's just not enough damage. With the Malignant gems, it could be possible. They're just slightly behind, maybe not so slightly, but they're behind all of the other builds. I would say you would subtract about 20 tiers from S to D. So if you are able to hit 100 with the top builds, I mean the top 2 rows besides Iron Maelstrom, Axe, and the Machine Gun, the top 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, including Thorns, they can all clear Nightmare tier 100. The others, they're going to fall short unless someone has godly gear. I don't personally see it. I've tried to push these builds and I've seen where the defensive layers really start being a struggle unless you like cheese the dungeons, take 2 hours and use that enchant on your neck that gives you 7 seconds of immunity pretty much. Maybe it's possible then, but it's not viable to use in a tier list setting. So I would say it's minus 20. So if you want to like cap out at 80, 85, maybe 90 with perfect gear with Upheaval, Death Blow, or Leap builds along with Kick. I didn't add Kick in here because there's like a meme Sparta build where like Leonidas where you're just kicking and one-shotting mobs, but the AoE is terrible. It's like a for fun thing and it's kind of like a supporting skill. Definitely something I wouldn't recommend building around unless you're just having fun. And that's what this game is about. So take this tier list with a grain of salt for the overall list. Now, if you want to redo this, and we want to do this for speed farming only, where I think, if I'm being honest, I think this is going to be relevant for most players, because if you're really, really competitive, you probably won't need a tier list unless you're competitive and you're just here to have fun. So this is going to be for speed farming only. And what are we going to start with? Mace Whirlwind, One-Handed Whirlwind, and the Iron Maelstrom variant. Those are going to be the top 3 best speed farming. If you have to go by the fastest, I would say the fastest is going to look like this. This is going to get us the highest tier and the fastest clears possible. Right now, the Iron Maelstrom kind of caps out at about 75, the mid 70 tiers, and they can do them in like 3, 4, or 5 minutes, depending on the dungeon. It's crazy fast. The only build outside of these 3 Whirlwind variants that can come close would be the Machine Gun Hammer the Ancients. Fast attack speed, but you're losing too much, so I really can't put it in the top tier. I'd have to put it in the A tier just below it. You're never going to run out of rage with the Machine Gun variant that I made. You're casting so quickly, and it's easy to get movement speed on it. So while you're speed farming 75s, maybe even 80s in the S tier, the A tier here would be more like speed farming 70s and topping out at 75s. Then we're going to move down a tier, and this is where the normal Hammer the Ancients, this is where I would put it, because it can still farm up to 90s, but to call it a speed farm, you would be lying to yourself. It's not that fast. It's slow, you have slower cast times, you're hitting for more than the machine gun build, but if you compare them side to side, which is what I did, I started off with the Unbridled Rage variant of Hammer the Ancients, and it was just underwhelming. It felt clunky, you had to constantly quake and it just wasn't a good time. If you had small density packs, you're running around waiting for your shouts to come off cooldown, or your lunging strike over and over again to get that damage and that fury generated back up, and I don't know, just a miserable playstyle. That's why I heavily prefer the attack speed machine gun version for sure. With that B tier as well, this is where I'd put the remaining Whirlwind builds because they're crazy fast. I would even put Leap here. If you have really strong gear, you can leap around one-shotting things. The only issue in why it's not higher is because the overall output cannot compete with things like Whirlwind. So this is why I didn't rename S, A, and B to the different tier levels, because Leap is going to be as fast as the Whirlwind builds, but it's going to be able to push slightly below it. But since the speed is so impressive, I have to keep it in B tier and not lower it anymore. The next one that's going to go here as well is Thorns. Thorns can be very fast. The only issue you're going to run into is if you have to kill objectives, that can definitely be a struggle, because if you're not taking incoming damage, you're not dealing damage. And if you want to deal damage, things like that, and even bosses can be a bit slow or really slow, you're going to have to add something on your kit on top of Thorns. It's going to complement the boss damage. So for now, we're going to put that on the B tier, and this is also where I'm going to put the double swing. So the B tier is overloaded pretty much for the Barbarian. And then if you want to drop down about 10 tiers to comfortably farming 60s, this is where I'd put the Rend, Deathblow, and Upheaval. I don't think anything is that much further away as far as being 5 ranks away from S to D for speed farming, even though if you look at S to C, the differences are going to be quite clear. If you compared the Iron Maelstrom Whirlwind variant that I was doing to a Ren build, we're probably talking about 4 to 5 minutes average of the same level dungeon. Let's just take 60 for example. That's a rather large amount of minutes for a variant, so that's what we're doing from S to C. So optimally, and in my opinion, these would be the most efficient builds to have with the current state of the game without the Malignant gems. For as soon as you finish campaign, you get the first set of rolls you need. Once you get into the tier 4, you're looking for cooldown, fury cost reduction, all of that good stuff. And then you can start moving into the S tier or the A tier builds, being the Machine Gun, Hammer of the Ancients, or one of the 3 top Whirlwind variants. Now we're going to be talking about the final version of this tier list that we're going to do, and it's going to be for bosses only. Now this is one's going to be pretty self-explanatory, so we're going to go through it very quickly. The number 1 build out of all of these 4 bosses is of course going to be the basic Hammer of the Ancients. With the way Quake is currently working for Hammer of the Ancients, when I say Quake, I'm talking about the... I don't even remember the name. It's the aspect that deals damage up to 100% if it's on a 2-handed weapon of Hammer of the Ancients in an AoE format, and if you hit a target with the edge of that AoE, it's doing double the damage it's supposed to be doing, which is why, I mean, roughly double, it's probably a bit more, which is why people are seeing the 60 million crits. So that's in the top tier and nothing else is in that tier. It's just that much better. The next build I'm going to put here is going to be Double Swing. Permanent vulnerable uptime, hard to beat. You're critting so often, you're losing a bit because you're not stunning, so there are some fury issues, but out of the rest of the builds, it's really hard to compete with Double Swing. And then this is probably the main issue with Barbarian at the moment. Things just start getting worse and worse. This is where the Machine Gun Hammer of the Ancients build comes in at 1 tier below that, then the Mace Whirlwind, the one-handed Whirlwind, the Iron Maelstrom variant of this Whirlwind build, and then finally the Bleed Whirlwind. That's where I would put into the B tier here. And then just to get out of the way in order, Thorns, terrible bossing, Rend, terrible bossing, Deathblow, if you're not one-shotting the bosses, it's not that good because it's such a long cooldown. And now if you're two-shotting it because you have 2 charges, technically this could be S tier, but that would be very low content, so it's hard to say that if you can one-shot the bosses, Deathblow is amazing. If you can't, I would put it at C, but that's just an example for you guys. Then Leap is going to be kind of bottom of the barrel for... It is pretty funny though. right? Just leaping on a boss over and over again. The damage isn't crazy, but it's a fun playstyle. Next we have Upheaval. I mean, how many of us wish that Upheaval was how it was originally? Was it a bit too strong? Yeah, but did they have to nerf it into the ground? I don't think so. I really don't think so. And the fact that the talents for Upheaval make it so you have to use another skill, a core skill, what is it, 10 times? Or another non-core skill 10 times before you get the 30x multiplier. Why not just make it 2 times, 3 times, even 5 times is better than 10? So that really limits our options for Upheaval as of now because of those massive nerfs. Next, of course, in the C tier, we're going to have the Axe build, and this Sword build is going to be, again, in that bottom tier of a bossing variant. So this pretty much covers all of the content we know about into the game. We had overall build, speed farming, and bossing. That's pretty much what it is. As far as a leveling tier list, I'm going to be streaming, and we're going to figure out what the best skills to use and the most fun skills to use, of course. I'm more focused on fun for leveling. If you are some speed farmer, you're not watching this video. If your goal is to rush to 100 in the first 27 hours of the season 1 being launched, you're not going to be following the tier list. You're going to be testing yourself, putting in hours of work, but for the majority of players, we're here to have fun. So I'm not really going to give my opinion on what I think the most fun builds are, because what I think is fun is Whirlwind, but some people think it's the most boring thing in the world. So it's to preference for me, and I don't want to show that because even though this was an opinionated tier list, it's all backed by testing, the amount of players who have cleared Nightmare 100, the amount of players who have cleared Uber Lilith. Where am I getting the data from? Every single major Discord you can think of, from the top content creators to the official Diablo Discord, to the Korean forums, and to the Chinese forums. That's where I got the 100 clear data from, and how I made that bossing list. As far as clear speed goes, the same thing, except for I actually played all of the builds. I've probably spent over 5 billion gold since just hitting 100. That doesn't include any testing I did prior to 100. Just at 100, over 5 billion gold. I'm testing out all of these builds for a minimum of probably 30 hours per. I have, I think, 15 days or more of playtime on my Barbarian, and I have every single class above level 70. So I've played a lot. I played with these builds a lot for Barbarian specifically, and that's pretty much kind of the TLDR and where I got this info from. So yes, it's opinion based, but it's opinion based with a little bit more than that, since I did pull a lot of these ideas from actual data. As far as for fun, I don't really want to give an opinion on that because it's up to you guys, right? Yes, gold is a huge limiting factor, but as you're using these skills, you can look at this list and say, well, this is the best, but I don't think it's as fun as something that's 2 tiers down. Play it. Play what's fun, because in the end, Barbarian is probably tied with Rogue or slightly under Rogue for the best class in the game. If you think that's a hot take, you have to consider that Barbarians have 4 builds that have cleared Nightmare 100, and they haven't struggled doing it. And they probably did it, I think they were the first class in the game to have 4 unique builds. Not variants of builds, unique builds to clear Nightmare 100. I believe it happened 6 days ago, was where the 4th and final, which was Thorns, cleared Nightmare 100. So that's my take on this. Hopefully you enjoyed this. Once the season of the Malignant comes out and I do some testing with those gems, I will then, of course, give a tier list for where we're farming gear, we're getting those new gems, testing them out, applying them to in-game, seeing how they farm, boss, all of the good stuff. There's going to be an update, but going into the season, you need something to work with. So look at these skills, play around with them in the preseason, see how fun they are to you, and you can use both of these resources to your advantage to make an informed decision on what you want to play, and leave a comment below. What are you playing in Season 1? If it's going to be a Barbarian, listen, Barbarian's strong. We gotta stick with it. They can nerf us as many times as they want. We're still gonna be such a good class because we just have so many skills that we can use for most of the content in this game. So that's going to conclude this video. If you enjoyed this content, smash the like button, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you're notified when I upload my next video, and I'll see you all there.